a legal person. Well, we did after 6:30, so we'll go ahead and kind of get started. Kind of mingle, look around at all the stuff we have in the room. That's kind of one of the things we want is just input from y'all. And as far as input goes, we have a couple different ways. You'll see throughout the room, we have a couple sheets that says leave me your email address if you want updates on the project. Please fill out and I'd be happy to update you every time we update. We have a comment card. We have these throughout the room as well. If you have any comments you want to leave us, you just can't get a hold of us and talk to us about it, please leave them here as well. And then another one is we have little stickies. The nice thing about sticky notes, feel free to place them on the boards where you like. And we have an empty board for sticky notes as well. And then we'll take all your guys' input, put it together, and that will help drive our next red line version of our codes. With that being said, I'd like to introduce Darcy and EQ from MIG. They are our consultants. They're the ones doing most of the work behind this. They've been awesome. And I can't forget Nikki from DLCD. She's been awesome as well. So that being said, we'll give it a couple more minutes, see if everybody can linger in a room, and then we'll turn the presentation over to MIG.
Since we said we have a presentation at 6:45, I'm reluctant to get started and leave anybody out. So we're going to wait until that time, and then it should be pretty short. We're hoping it's short. We're going to try to make it short so that you have time to ask questions and get a little bit more information on some of the things that we talk about in the slide presentation. So that's kind of the way that will go, and we'll be here until 8:30 or until folks have exhausted their questions or their comments. As Rick said, we do have a draft of proposed changes to your zoning ordinance, your development regulations. And that copy is available. It's not, I don't know that we have it here in its paper format. It is chunky and it is as Rick suggested, a red line format, so a lot of cross outs and underlines. And a exercise like this, when you're changing a fundamental document, you want to make sure you don't lose anything, right? So everyone knows what's not going to be in place anymore. Everyone knows what the new stuff is. So we're really careful about modifying adopted documents. Unfortunately, it becomes very messy very quickly with everything kind of coming in and out in that format of text. I think the other thing I would impress upon you is that one of the next steps in the project will be actually at your planning commission. So they're going to be considering other proposed changes, again, to zoning, to your zoning regulations, your development regulations. And what you share tonight will help them make sure that the recommendation they make to city council, who will in turn adopt some changes, that their recommendation is sound and really supported by you as community members and representatives of your community. So don't hesitate to share your concerns, your thoughts. If you like something in particular, that's all going to be really helpful to your elected officials and your appointed officials. With that, let's give it about 5 more minutes. Take a look around. I'll get into, and Nikki will get into a little bit more of the details of what the changes that are being considered, what they entail. That probably will spur some additional questions. We hope that they will. Yeah.
So I got 2 other groups that I really need to acknowledge. They're not here, unfortunately, but their work is here. So the architecture renditions that you see kind of going around, that is from our Sustainable City Year program that we're participating with the U of O. So the red line versions, I sent them off to the University of Oregon architecture students, and I asked them to create these designs based on the red line versions, not our current versions. So what you see here is kind of the changes we're proposing. And on that note, if you see the stuff here and then here and here, if those were to come to me with a building permit, I would have to deny it based on our zoning. So if you like, wow, that has a really neat design. Our current zoning won't allow the architecture work you see here today. And that was kind of the point, was to highlight what we could be missing out on. And then the second group is a second SCYP program. We work with their GIS, which is Geospatial Informational Services Science. And they were the ones who helped me create the map for the changes. They were the ones who identified all the properties next to the necessary infrastructure. And we'll dive more into that later as far as how we decided what lots to upzone and what lots to leave where they were. But the mapping process for that largely came from the University of Oregon and their GIS program as well. So definitely have to credit to those. They've put in a lot of work into it. Definitely got to help get us where we are today. So. Any responses?
Yeah. Nobody else's. Get around. Figured. Oh, yeah. Oh, wow, yeah. Anyway, different students. There's that big pasture. Oh, yeah. I know, I can be
Yeah, that's a lot when you see the design based on.
Oh,
Right on.
It's like first
This is what's already stuff right now.
right, they don't go deep. Yeah. Okay.
It's just.
You know, if water happened. So they separated the two types of housing, one oriented towards more young people.
So close.
Maybe a
See.
Six 42. Yeah, it's really fun to see that, and yeah, no, this is about
I know.
You've been on it since the very beginning of year one, and that was 2021. Wow. So yeah, That's been a couple years.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right after I started at Meg.
Okay, yeah, so this is one of your little first babies.
Yeah.
Rick also will talk about
Sometimes they present.
yeah.
All these things. Yeah, that's what. That's where. It's all up.
I was there, right? They asked me that. Something you're working on.
To tell you a lot more about it.
Feel pretty good for an old sheriff. One year. Don't you?
We basically looked at all the parcels in town. And looked at all your steep slopes and areas not good with development. And then they looked at all your infrastructure, like your sewer, water pipes, and areas that are good for development. And they made one big map that shows where their own future development should go. Yeah. That's a lot.
When you say they made a map, who made
The
it?
U of O student.
The U of O student, do we have that here?
Right, but that's only.
Yeah, so the final product is that colorful map that Rick was showing. Yeah, that's the final product. This is all the different data layers that. Yeah, and then you.
This is all different stuff.
And this is going to benefit this one too. Yeah, these are the different chapters of the zoning and everything. And it's kind of hard to read because of all the colors, but basically this is all the new text that's in the middle of it. And then everything that's going away is starting out. You got the line.
All of this goes together in one package.
Right.
So, we need to go through.
And this is online. I wanted to go through it in more detail.
Do I need somebody to listen?
Your city of Oakridge planning.
All right.
We're ready.
Put up on the screen.
Give you a little lower. Thank you so much. Rick gave a really nice kind of introduction of what we're doing tonight and a welcome. So again, I'll welcome you all. Thank you for being here. Thank you to the people joining us online. Hopefully we're coming through loud and clear. Give us a high sign if you aren't. So my name is Darcy Rudzinski. I'm with a planning and design firm called MIG. My colleague, Emma Smith. Nicole Frost is with the Transportation Growth Management
Program.
Thank you, oh my gosh, department program. So we're here tonight to kind of introduce you to the stage we're at in this project. If we could advance the slides, Nikki. EQ, Rick, myself, we're kind of tag team this, go through these quickly, and then we'll be available for questions, of course. So simple agenda there. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. This is the project team. Again, we're in the room today for your questions, except for James, but again, probably most of you know him. He's been really helpful in our first phase of this project. You could go, advisory committee. We also want to acknowledge that there's been an advisory committee assisting with this project from the first phase to the second and helping us understand if what is being proposed by way of changes to your regulations are consistent with where the community wants to go. There's any number of ways you can write a code to influence what future development looks like, but that doesn't mean it's good for Oakridge. So we're getting feedback from the advisory committee to help us really right size what those requirements should be. We're supported by a grant from the Transportation Road Management Program, the TGM program, and that's next slide. That is a joint program between the Department of Land Conservation and Development and ODOT, Oregon Department of Transportation. So it is a effort at a very high level, state level, to make sure that our land use and our transportation systems are coordinated, that we're growing in a way that can be sustained and supported by your transportation infrastructure. So that's really the point there. The mission of this program really is to help communities plan for vibrant neighborhoods and for downtowns, and to be able to reach those places by a variety of different transportation modes, not just by car, but by walking safely or bicycling safely. So that's the mission. So we have kind of a point of view with this project, and it's embodied with the TGM mission. Next slide. So it's also grounded in these smart development principles. So TGM projects like this one for Oakridge, they're really rooted in smart development and sustainable growth principles. So it's important to acknowledge that Oakridge has unique circumstances. It's not a big town. Doesn't necessarily need to or want to be, a big town. And through this project, we've kind of explored how the community really sees improvement and growth in the future for existing and future residents, for people who live and work in Oakridge. The next slide has our project objectives. Again, this is the second phase of a two-phase project. So these objectives have been guiding our work throughout. You can see in what's up on this slide, really how land use and transportation objectives are integrated. The first phase of the project was identifying barriers and seeking opportunities to really meet these objectives. And in this phase, we're trying to implement these objectives. We're trying to put requirements in place that will see improvements, see development in the future that meet the project objectives. So specifically, next slide, we are creating a policy framework, making sure that Oakridge has policy statements that are consistent with the objectives. And then we're creating or updating existing development requirements. And that's what you're here trying to see the results of tonight. Our work is consistent with some really detailed analysis that was performed as part of your housing needs assessment. If you have questions about that, Rick can probably answer many of those. But basically, that was really research into what you have today and what you need in the future by way of housing. So what types, at what income levels, and that analysis helped us determine what changes in your policies, what changes in your development code need to happen in order for you to house the people that you have and will have in Oakridge. Next slide is our process, our overview of our process. It's a little small. The darker blue is where we're at today. Series of advisory committees has informed and helped us create some changes to what we're calling amendments draft 2. That's just meaning we have first draft, now we're having a second draft that's refined. It's all about requirements in your development ordinance. So it's nothing that obligates anyone to do anything today, but if you want to develop land in the future, you would have to follow these rules and requirements. Planning Commission meets next to really dive into the proposed changes and also consider what you say tonight. Also consider what the advisory committee has said about these proposed changes. So that's where we're headed. And the ultimate objective is to have a newly improved and adopted ordinance whereby, that's going to be the law of the land for Oakridge. Until it's time it's amended again. So that's that. I'm gonna switch over to EQ. She's gonna talk a little bit about the housing needs.
Yeah, so as Darcy mentioned, the housing needs analysis, or HNA, was one of the foundational pieces of information that we use to make some of our code update recommendations. And one of the main findings of the housing needs analysis was that Oakridge has plenty of land that is still developable within the city. It's just not zoned in a way that can be used to develop housing. And that's a really great problem and a unique problem to have. A lot of cities need to expand their UDPs in order to accommodate housing. But Oakridge has plenty of room. It just doesn't have the right rules applied to it. So we sought to rewrite some of those rules to allow for the right kind of housing development to take place. Housing development that will provide more flexibility for the community and accommodate any long-range needs that Oakridge might have. And also the HNA provided a few recommendations that helped shape how we amended the code. We wanted to support new housing development in Uptown, create new types of housing that meet the community's expected needs, implement clear and easy to understand development requirements, and provide more transportation options. All of that is part of what goes into housing development. All of that is what we touched with some of our code updates. Next slide, please. So our hope is that from these code amendments, the code will be easier to use and easier to understand for developers of housing and commercial development. It will also support new development in your Uptown district. We hope that new types of housing will be easier for folks to develop. And also that land use and transportation planning requirements will provide more transportation options. So things like enhanced bus stops might be required, or more bike parking, things that just make it a little easier to get around town. Next slide, please. In addition to the code amendments to the development ordinance, we are proposing some amendments to your comprehensive plan, and this comprehensive plan just provides the policy foundation for the zoning code. So we've drafted a set of updated housing policies that will allow planning commission and RIC to go through and say, yes, this development meets the policies that the city has decided will shape our community, and it also meets the development requirements. Next slide, please. The whole project was from phase 1 through now was focused around 5 key topics of housing, Uptown, transportation, the mixed use zone, and then a few other and miscellaneous standards that we addressed, including creating this unified development ordinance. But we'll talk about that a little more later. So we'll start with housing. Next slide, please. And Rick is going to take us through this new R3 zone, and then I'll talk about some housing topics.
So we couple these around, and there's one on this poster board here, which how we got to the choice of what we're proposing as R3 is based on existing infrastructure. So during one of the SCYP projects with the University of Oregon and their GIS students, I gave them all our GIS data, which was our utilities. So they were able to map our utilities based on the size of the utility. And I asked them to return to me all the lots that are adjacent to a 6-inch and greater water main, within 500 feet of a fire hydrant, and within adjacent to a 8-inch sewer main. So with that criteria, they showed me all these lots. And then from there, I started deducting lots based on natural hazards. The 2 main natural hazards I deducted, one for slope or topography, and the second one was we completely took the floodplain out of the consideration. So that is how we got to what we have today. Some of them, like in the northwest, utility wise, is absolutely sufficient for an R3, the heavy density, but the topography is kind of hilly. It's been kind of reduced back to a potential R2, just based on the cost of building. And the whole point of identifying these lots based on existing utilities was to drive down the cost of development. hopefully, best case scenario from my perspective is, we get some housing development, large or mid-sized apartment complexes, workforce housing. And it's easier to sell workforce housing to the developers if they don't have to develop the infrastructure to get them to the subject line. So, in a nutshell, there's a little more minutia to it than that, but in a nutshell, that's how we came to the lots that we are proposing today.
Yeah, so we're proposing this new R3 zone and then also proposing rezoning some current R1 parcels to R2. So from low to medium density and then medium to a little bit higher density development. And there are several of these zoning maps around the room if you want to take a look at them later. Next slide, please. So another one of the proposed changes is to allow middle housing types. And middle housing types are the kind of development that will be potentially going on some of these newly rezoned parcels. And middle housing is townhouses, cottage clusters, duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, all kind of smaller unit types that allow more flexibility on a lot and are potentially more affordable because they're a little bit smaller units. They also provide, particularly cottage clusters, can provide a more communal living style for perhaps elderly community members to be closer to their neighbors while still maintaining a more independent lifestyle. And we hope that more of these will be developed throughout Oakridge as the community continues to evolve.
And if I could interject too, Rick used the term workforce housing, and it's kind of a term of art, but it's meant to kind of encapsulate some of these housing types that might be more affordable to the workforce. So not precise term, but when you hear that, that's really where we're aiming for.
Middle housing in between like an apartment and a single family. That's what it's in. Slide, please. Also in accordance or to help the city's code comply with some new state legislation that's come out, we've removed barriers to prefabricated and manufactured housing to make it easier to site prefabricated homes on single family lots and also allow more manufactured home parks outright in the R1 zone. And that just allows more flexibility with the siting manufactured homes in the city and doesn't require any rezoning for that. Next slide, please. We've also suggested increasing the ADU height limit to 24 feet or 2 stories, which just allows property owners to have more flexibility with what they can do on their property, and it creates a little bit larger building envelope for people to live in if a second home on a lot is desired. It also simplifies, we've also suggested simplifying architectural and design standards for housing development. Again, just to make it easier for people to understand what you can build on your property.
Right, it's as long as people are familiar with ADU accessory dwelling unit, accessory to the single family home that's on the lot or the duplex that's on the lot.
Moving on to Uptown, we have a few recommendations pertaining to Uptown. Next slide, please. So this is the Uptown district. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it.
Really nice graphic in the back there. You?
Yeah.
Very lovely.
Next slide, please. And this is a district that's not only integral to the community's economy, but also a sub-district of your zoning code. It's currently called Old Town in the zoning code, but we learned from everyone that it's actually just Uptown, and you have the lovely Uptown billboard. So we suggest updating the zoning code to reflect the common name of the district and just help everyone know what we're talking about. Next slide, please. We've also suggested simplifying the design standards for Uptown, so removing that frontier style architecture that's currently required, just to hopefully make it a little cheaper and easier to develop in Uptown. There are still design standards required, but we've created a menu of design choices, such as architectural elements on the tops of buildings, adding extra windows, adding awnings or recessed entrances to add a little bit of flavor to the front of buildings. And this still gives developers plenty of flexibility with developing their buildings, but also creates an attractive and keeps uptown, maintains the great character that you already have in the neighborhood. Next slide, please. So here's examples of what some of those design requirements. Again, developers can choose free from a menu of options that are in the code, and a little extra style. Next slide, please. Finally, we've made a small change to the parking standards in uptown. Currently, the code requires van pools and carpool designated parking stalls for developments of certain sizes in uptown, and we're removing those just to make it more efficient land use in uptown and make it a little bit cheaper for developers again. Very minor adjustment there. Next slide, please. And Darcy will talk more about parking.
I'll go through these really quickly, because predominantly they are just changes in the development ordinance related to implementing your adopted transportation system plan. So you already have a policy level document that says what the city intends. Your code just needs to make sure that developers also are consistent with your long range transportation plan. So the next slide, I like to think about if and when. I know that you talked about transit stuff. We know you don't have fixed route transit today, but if you get additional housing, additional people, it starts making more sense to have transit. We want to be prepared for that and make sure that we have things in place that support that mode of transportation as well. So with this slide, if and when future development includes off-street parking lots, then they need to be connected internally safely for pedestrians, right? Because sometimes you get out of the car and get to someplace, you want to be safe as you move to a parking lot. The next slide is bicycle parking. It has to do with future transit transfer stations. I know that sounds probably pretty aspirational today, but your transportation system plan, that planning process definitely talked about future transit someday. You'll have it, and if you have a parking right lot, you will also have some spaces for bicycles. That's what that says. Future lot design standards is the next slide. That's to make sure that large surface lots are designed to include trees and landscaping, so they're just not all hardscape. And then the next slide is transportation impact analysis requirements. These are the thresholds by which Rick would require to see additional information. Your planning commission would require to see additional information to make a decision. And it's only when you get types of development that were not foreseen or not planned for in your transportation system plan. So if it's an upzoning, for example, going to cause more trips than you planned for, the developer's going to have to show you how that's going to work. Does the system accommodate it, or are they going to have to build something into their proposal, their development, to make sure that they are accommodating the trips that they're going to generate. So just additional information requirement is how I kind of think about the TIA. And I think we're into the mixed use zone.
So in the mixed use zone, we've made a few changes to the uses that are allowed. No standalone residential uses are permitted, but residential uses would be permitted as part of a mixed use development. So commercial and residential in the same building, perhaps. We've also added a list of uses that might support those residential units within the mixed use zone, including daycare facilities, or kind of low intensity uses like gardens or greenhouses. And most of the commercial uses that are permitted in the mixed use zone are currently permitted in your commercial zones. So it's not anything new to Oakridge, just new to the mixed use zone. Next slide, please. And finally, some of the other updates we've made to the code are a clear and objective site plan review process. That is something that is also required from the state to allow it to be, allow Rick to have an easier time approving your site plan permits. And finally, restructuring into a unified development ordinance. Right now, there are a few random ordinances floating out there. Your sign codes, some marijuana related ordinances, floodplain and land division, they're all combined into one document with these changes. And It'd be a little easier to find everything when it's just at one link on the planning website. Next slide, please. Next slide. So moving forward, we're heading towards adoption. But first we have a planning commission work session to make sure that all the folks who will be helping implement the code know what the potential changes are, and getting any feedback from them on the current changes. We also will then have a planning commission hearing to start that adoption process, followed by a city council hearing to finalize the adoption of any code amendments. Next slide, please. So we thank you all for being here tonight. We hope that you'll take a look around with all of the boards, and feel free to ask any questions, give us any comments and feedback. If you think of anything after tonight's meeting and don't get a chance to write it down, feel free to call or email Rick. And yeah, we're excited to have so many folks here and excited for your feedback. So thank you for your time and attention.
If you haven't had a chance, I'm gonna move this back up. Please sign in so that we know that you were here. Your planning commission knows that you were here. We're not planning in a vacuum. We're actually planning for you. I think that was the only other thing I was thinking of.
There's some great University of Oregon student work fun to look at. So take that into.
You want to take some questions?
Yeah.
My question is, if you know anything about these stadiums that we go to and there's never enough park. And you're here telling us, we want to design things for, if you build a bar here, make sure there's enough parking, or you open a restaurant, enough parking. Do you guys look into these, like the University of Oregon, where we have to park 5 miles away because the building was built to have, I don't know how many thousands of people, but the parking is a lot less than half. Do you guys look into that?
Yeah, we look into parking for sure, but where we typically find, and it's a controversial, not very popular point of view, we typically find that cities are overparked, that there are parking spaces that are just not used most days, most weeks. And it's a public good, it's a public something that's available to the public that's underutilized, right? So having a parking problem is oftentimes a good problem in that you have a vibrant community, you have a community where things are happening in Eugene where football is happening. So the parking issues, if you have parking issues, as in you don't have enough parking, it's impacting your businesses because people say, oh, you can't go to downtown Oakridge, you can't find any place to park. I haven't seen that, heard that as part of this project. What we have heard is make sure we plan for the availability of parking to make sure that downtown uses have spaces for customers and visitors. Today, it doesn't look like you have a parking problem from an outsider's perspective. Tomorrow, as in 10 years, even 20 years in the future, if this downtown area, uptown, really booms, develops, you start getting more residents who have 1 or 2 cars, then you might start to see that crunch, right? Where the availability is inhibiting or dissuading people from coming down and shopping or visiting City Hall or going to the post office. But yes, we definitely look at parking availability, we look at parking location. We know you have a municipal lot, that's not always the case in small towns, that's a bonus, that's something that the city controls. So I hope that somewhat answers your question.
Are there any plans for transitional housing?
That I don't have the answer to.
So I know we've discussed transitional housing in the project advisory committee meetings. Fortunately, it hasn't gotten a lot of traction, but I think transitional housing is important. And some of the examples that I've seen that are useful for communities is to allow transitional housing conditionally, which conditionally what that means is in order to get the approval, the applicant has to go in front of planning commission. That gives the planning commission opportunity to put regulations, conditions on it. So what I think from my planner perspective, And from an Oakridge resident perspective, I've lived here for 49 years. My proposal would be to allow transitional housing in all residential zones as long as it accompanies the conditional use permit. So what that does is then the planning commission gets to review the conditions, set conditions, and I think one of the conditions that should be out of the gate, we can't even apply unless you're a 501c3 or a religious organization and a business plan. So if you have a business plan, a 501c3 or a religious institution, then you would be able to go to planning commission. Commission would be like, hey, you know, there's these concerns. Here's how I want you to meet these concerns. And what that would do is that would give people with trying to do transitional housing more freedom on where they can go. And those people who are in transitional housing don't feel like they're being pushed out into industrial areas. They don't feel like they're being pushed out into the areas where nobody wants to be. They will blend in more with the residents in the community if they are just simply with residents in the community. So that is my 2 cents. That is my opinion. I hope that I would be able to persuade people to agree with me, but I guess through this process is where we find it out. So that's
a big need for it here. I wouldn't want to see a homeless shelter in Oakridge for sure. But a place for some of these folks to transition into more stable housing. This year, we've seen a huge increase with elderly and disabled. And so having the ability to transition them into secure housing instead of trying to find homeless shelters.
Yeah, we've talked a little bit with Rick and provided some examples, almost like model code sections or chapters. But there are quite a few decisions to be made as related to location and requirements. And it seems to also kind of start to morph into who runs them, how are they run, how long can you stay, so the operations that really isn't code. It's actually quite a big community lift to come up together with the right components, the right pieces of the puzzle to permit that type of housing. So that's where we haven't really tackled it with this project. It's really outside of our kind of our scope. But certainly the state allows it. The state has some requirements, but really allows communities to determine what works for them, codify what works for Oakridge. But the pieces of it can really spur some very good conversations, but also some very heartfelt and heated conversations. So you have to parse the time out to have that and create something that that works for your community. So it's a big conversation.
Rick, I mean, that conditional use permit exists today.
yes, it's not.
You wouldn't have to change anything to make the reality. You just need to find an organization that's going to step up.
We don't have the condition of the 501c3 or religious organization, and plus that type of building type is more like the if I have the right phrase, but where you have just a sleeping area, that our building code, our code is not allowed, and then
It's not permitted.
it is not
Conditional.
correct. Yeah, so that would also highlight the possibilities.
Yeah.
And remove those barriers. Sorry?
What about tiny home style structure?
That all depends on, there's 3 types of tiny homes to discuss. 2 that are permitted outright as ADUs, accessory dwelling units, and a 3rd which is not. The 3rd which is not is basically a flatbed trailer with a built on top of it, and you tow it around. That is an RP. Now there's the manufactured tiny homes, which are basically just that, a small manufactured home. And then there's the site-built tiny homes as well. So those latter 2, yes, those are outright allowed. 1 per lot at the moment. 1 is accessory to the main structure, and so that would be accessory to the main single house that we have today. But that's where that stands. As far as the RV style, there are issues with Oregon Building Department that are beyond Oregon Planning Department.
But no, they work really great for carrying it forward and other programs for their transitional housing.
So that would have to be identified as an RV, and an RV would have to be identified as allowed potentially conditional use. We do have a similar clause in our zoning at the moment. You can get a temporary use permit for an RV based on medical hardship. But again, that has to go through the planning commission, and medical hardship, I think, is a little intrusive in people's lives. And, I agree with there. But if we could write something similar to that, I would definitely love to see that happen. But to be able to permit, say, 7, 8 sleeping style structures, sleeping only, that one is a hurdle with our zoning, absolutely, a hurdle with our zoning.
So where do you get that? Is there a conflict with transitional housing and zoning?
Yes,
Where does it occur? What zoning?
all of our zoning, I can't, if somebody wanted to come for building permit, to build something like that, I cannot issue the building permit based on our zoning. But then the other option is for people in those situations, is they're just gonna, I'm just gonna do it. And then they invest time, effort, and money into something that they can lose at the risk of their neighbor complaining about them or complaining during a process. Not only could they risk losing their structure, they could risk being fined. A lot of, it's not a fair and fun process. So by allowing it outright, or allowing it conditionally and making it a process, then we could get there. And as far as the exact details of the process, I don't, like Darcy was saying, it's conversation we need to have. I don't have all the answers. But that's why we're here, is to discuss it type of thing.
So you can go through a conditional use permit, but what are the conditions on which you will say yes? Does there have to be a bathroom and HVAC units, or does there have to be a communal kitchen area? How large does that have to be? How close does it have to be to the dwellings? What's the separation between the dwellings, right? They're not necessarily on foundations. Do they have to be on foundations? There's all those situations, and then as you think about those as a community, you actually have to visualize what that looks like, right? And then what size lot are you going to allow them on? Like, what's the minimum lot size? It's a lot. It's like it's a new type of thing. And again, they're good starts. They're jurisdictions that have codified or have considered codifying, whole chapters. So, certainly, you could start that conversation about, are these the right components? Are these the things we're going to require so that they can happen here? We want them to happen, but you have to make kind of decisions about all those things, just as you would like a new zone, like you're thinking about tonight. So
that relates to my next question. Are there zoning categories that we're considering tonight that would potentially allow that type of use?
no,
And what, even not this one?
Don't have anything in the red lines to that aspect, no.
Is that something we need to be thinking about?
I think it's something we need to think about, absolutely, yes.
While we're here.
Yes, why we're here, yeah.
Darcy, can I ask a question on manufactured homes? You talked about easing the ability to put them into R1. And rely upon the building, state building official to regulate the design of those homes or the requirements of those homes.
the design, I think Rick was talking about the trailers, the RV variety of.
But the manufactured homes are all
The
very.
manufactured homes will need to be, will need to comply with your underlying R1 zone. So when you think about manufactured homes, it's a kit of parts. The components manufactured off-site, assembled, efficiently on-site, but the setbacks will be the same, the height limitations will be the same. And it will be, for all intents and purposes, a single family home in R1. It's just, yeah.
But I think to get to the question, so it would have to meet HUD standards. So there are building design standards that are different from site-built homes to manufactured homes. At zoning and land use, we cannot ask differences of the two. For the Oregon Building Code, can ask differences of the two based on fire and life safety and our values, comfort levels. But for zoning, it's off limits for us. But for the building of the structure and the safety of the structure, it's on limits for the building department. Building department's gonna follow that standard, sorry.
So you don't anticipate the governor using those standards, given our focus on housing availability?
That I do. But maybe not those ones so much. I actually would love to see her ease the standards on the RB style tiny homes. But for manufactured homes and the HUD classification, that's federal.
Yeah, so I had a couple of questions. So I'm a proponent of entry level homes. I think we've all, anybody that's my age anyway, has started here. You know, down the road, you get a little bit nicer house and so on. When you were talking about the multiplex, you alluded to a reduced price. Do you have any more information about how reduced, say, if you had a fourplex, what each one would sell for? And how that might compare with the mean cost of a home.
We don't have that information for this project. If you're a realtor, you would do comparables to other homes for sale in Oakridge and figure out, you know, what a new fourplex unit might, you know, run. If you don't have a lot of those comparables in Oakridge, you might look to some more sized Oregon communities. I think maybe the germ of the question really is affordability and how affordable, like what's the price point and who could get into that unit, you know, tomorrow if it were built. And we don't know that. And we didn't do an economic analysis about housing affordability. What we will say as part of this project is we are helping Oakridge have a development ordinance, a zoning map that will allow for more types of housing to be built. So not focused on the single family, single lot home, but allow for these different housing types that use land more efficiently. Sometimes can be built more efficiently depending on the location, the lot size, etc. And thereby allowing for a price point, allowing for a home that by comparison may be more affordable than a single family on a single lot built at the same time, right? Same age. That's really as far as we can go. You know, the idea is to create the opportunity for a variety of housing types that should have a variety of price points, a variety of affordability associated with them. So people can move around in Oakridge, they can come and get a first home. The other thing that happens with housing is when you have new housing units, your older housing units sometimes start becoming more affordable, right? There's kind of an upcycle turn in a community, right? You're actually creating more opportunities for a small single family bungalow that might have been built in the 30s or 40s to become a rental property, right? Or to become a first time homeowners, opportunity. But how that happens in Oakridge is not something that we can predict with this project. Certainly economists and realtors, they could do that type of work. But we're not really talking about affordability so much as housing choice.
I think that's, I get that. But I think as a community, you know, we might be asking the question, how can we create entry level homes? What would it look like? You know, the village slide that you put up, you know, what do those homes cost compared to, you know, 250, I'm just guessing, mean price for a home in Oakridge.
I think it's important to be asking these questions. We are asking them too, but we have to do this project before you can even build those types of housing. So it's just an ongoing, process.
And as far as affordable housing goes, share a conversation I had a couple of years ago with the Lane counties, basically their housing authority, which is Homes for Good. I was still a student, and I was chatting with their executive director about building apartment complexes in Oakridge, something similar like we see at Ironwood Village or one off School Street, I'm blanking on the name. Anywho, I had a conversation with him about is there potential for doing work on Oakridge, and he said he would absolutely love to come to Oakridge, likes the community. But then I started talking about zoning with him because I was in planning classes, and I shared with him that we do not have a high density residential district. So he basically told me we're done. I can't build anything. We're done. So the point of that, and one of the points that I try to, for me, the real heart of it is we're limiting what can be built in Oak Ridge with regards to housing by our current zoning. And we're here today to try to open that up, try to remove those guidelines, try to remove those unnecessary barriers. Yeah.
So my next question was, I see Elton Meadows, Bugle Road. I'm familiar with that subdivision. And it was planned for and marketed. Not sold as, with the list of CC&Rs. I don't know what that list compiles, but I'm thinking, that's probably not in it. So I just wondered if you guys looked at that at all.
I don't believe this lot to be within the CC&Rs, and even then, CC&Rs is not really our purview. CC&Rs is a private contract, municipalities as planners, we don't enforce that. We don't, that's not our path to walk. But by trying to plan for the future off of CC&Rs that exist for the area that is completely adjacent to it will slow us down on the other one. So I'm okay with having zoning that is less restrictive than CC&Rs in the area, because those are mine to enforce, and that unfortunately is due diligence of the builder. I hate saying that because it is what it is. The CC&Rs are meant to keep those type of people out, and we need to let those type of people in. We need to let all type of people in. So basically, what I'm trying to say is, no, I know that CC&Rs did happen for Elk Meadows. I don't believe that they still exist, and to be honest, I'm not going to plan off somebody else's CC&Rs.
My question was, when you have your mixed dwelling or your residential where you're asking, or people are asking to put additional ADUs, is any of the zoning requirements for the main dwelling gonna change? Like what constitutes your main dwelling? If someone bought this property and they were like, okay, well, I want to put a greenhouse and a tiny home in the garage. Are they able to consider the tiny home their main dwelling? Does it have to be a modular? Does it have to be a stick built? Like, are there any of those details changing as to what constitutes the main dwelling? To go with, you know how go ahead and like
I do,
have
yeah.
your main dwelling and then you have your additional use with the new zoning. I noticed there's a whole bunch of changes with mixed use in our minor too. Are those criteria that's going to change as to what constitutes as your main dwelling?
I think we more have the opposite. We have what constitutes the ADU based on size. As far as what constitutes as a main dwelling, that is kind of a gray area that I don't have a great answer for.
So if you're building like from scratch, okay, and you had to determine which one was the main building, I think that's just a matter of the percentage of size, right? The ADU can't be bigger than. So the smaller building, wherever you have it on the lot and whatever you call it, is gonna be smaller than the other one. So I think that would determine what it is. And as far as construction, again, it wouldn't be whether it's stick built or prefabricated, manufactured, brought on site, assembled.
Yeah.
That the code doesn't talk to that.
So a mixed use and a residential will still require a single family home with a bedroom, kitchen, closet in order to add any other being used to it, right? Is that pretty much how it is now?
Right, so what constituted a structure or a habitable unit? Again, that's building code.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering, all those will stay the same.
Yeah.
Okay.
But Mark, it looks like most of your efforts on design standards were tied to uptown. You guys look at the highway commercial district.
We didn't change it.
No, and that was.
Is that you're happy personally with where it stands? Or?
That was-
No, I'm not happy with where it stands, but Project Tree and prevented us from.
Yeah.
I did want, I mean, I did mention that and the bottom line is it's not their project. But on that note, I have found a bunch of other stuff. As soon as this project is over, I want to address. But we get this project over, and that is a great example of what we address next.
Yeah, clearly in phase one, the barrier, whether perceived or real, to developing an uptown really focused on uptown design standards, not being appropriate anymore and needed to be addressed and revised. So.
And I think highway should follow suit.
Yes.
It's just next
Next
project.
step. Yeah. Thanks. Hope you get to go more.
Yes.
Yeah, it's definitely, the code is not done. Your comprehensive plan, not done. We bitten off a chunk of it with this project. We had very defined objectives with this project, and as I mentioned, a point of view. So we've been kind of kept to that. And yeah, we've done what we could within the time frame and our charge. But certainly, there are things that could be improved. And, to the benefit of the community, not just because, somebody said it could be improved.
Well, you did elaborate though a bit on transportation. You mentioned ODOT. And you mentioned a few other things. Now, can you tell us more how transportation works into your project here?
When the city updated the transportation system plan and went through that process, and that was a process of looking at existing conditions, looking at future population and employment and future conditions of future trips projecting out 20 years, looking at safety, looking at uptown parking reconfiguration. All of that was part of that project. And part of that project was, well, if we update our transportation system plan, but then our development code doesn't make people do the sidewalks as wide as they're supposed to do, or they don't make people actually, build out that half street improvement to the width that our new TSP says it should be, then you're never going to see those changes on the private side, on the private development side. So your development ordinance, there was a series of recommendations and actually code amendments that were made along with the updated TSP that just never got adopted. So as part of this project, we folded in those recommendations, we revisited them, and we made code modifications that would ensure that future development follows the rules that you have in place in the transportation system. So it's not, we didn't really focus on the public right of way. We did not focus on Highway 58 because again,
How about
that's,
the railroad?
we do not focus on the railroad. If someone develops next to the railroad, there's no specific requirements except to stay out of it. Stay out of that right away.
Well, it certainly affects the ability to get in and out of that.
100%. Yes,
Yeah.
it is, it definitely is a very pronounced picture of your transportation system. But that system planning happened as part of the other project. As Rick's mentioned, just because you have a long range plan that looks out 20 years, it doesn't mean you wait for 20 years to update it, right? So you may be coming into a cycle where you're revisiting some of those assumptions, some of those recommendations from your long range transportation system plan. So if you update it and something changes, that requires the developers to pitch in or do something different, as far as their improvements, transportation improvements, then you go and update your code to make sure. But,
Well, I was just curious to know how that factored into your work.
Yeah. Yeah,
On this.
it did, but not the railroad. Not the railroad, not the public right of way, no. They're good questions.
Recommended this.
Yeah, so if there's no more
Please, we're
questions,
here.
yeah,
Yeah,
mingle, and, we're here to.
I think it was too embarrassing to say.
Oh, and reminder, we do have.
Oh,
So
please.
leave us notes, we'll take them.
Right. I can buy that lot.
Wait, Mike.
It's a double wide.
Yeah, of course. And again, we'll get to that part.
You got.
Yeah.
Well, he'll probably be on the CT. The guy's full of skirt. Or the front of the neighbor.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I don't want, somebody for the double line.
Lakers and Royals, right?
Well, that's good, because
Well.
that's how it works.
Yeah.
Ask about the parking. So it seems like you had a point of view about the parking.
Were you involved? Yeah. Parking spaces that they have at. Somebody going.
Oh, no. Why is Dawn in the waiting room?
Oh, she had to leave, and then she had to come, I think she went to come back in.
We don't have a wait, oh, here, there she is.
Okay.
Another park in the street.
Where do we sign to get the emails?
That is, there's 3 of them. And it's just, no.
It was right here.
There's nothing at the door.
Yeah. It was a mile and a quarter. Where I caught it.
It was designed based on, represented. And so it's kind of similar to, had something from the table. No, it had something like that. It was on. Sarah, that, so the application. That that way rather than saying you want to join us. And of course, all those other voices are coming in.
Yeah.
Speeds up that first paper process by estimating. So we'll want to what's that?
I didn't remember that. I was like,
Yeah.
No, sorry.
And parking is about 30.
And how many of them have? I don't know.
Oh, yeah. I don't know where we.
Yeah.
That's it. I think we're getting for, yes,
I was gonna ask you,
I'm like, oh my gosh. I know. I feel like I was getting up, he just like on the track to the new or whatever, because it was part of it. And so much was like, so I think about that and think, it's like,
That's
I got the very last house. The last house has to be all the way there, right? But if like. Yeah.
And one of them, like, yeah, is it a combination? Yeah. Oh, it's right up Rosemary. Yeah, they were, yeah. So that's cool.
Right.
Like,
Oh, then there's. There's to do without that.
We're very.
Right.
Yes, yeah.
So that kind of stuff.
I was out there.
Biggest challenge is gonna be, I mean, I just, yeah, that backslide. I'm never trying to
I mean, you can always, I was always getting stressed out. So, I mean, I was like, oh, this is not done. Or so. That is like, what's important kind of area. Yeah. So yeah.
Yes, you see.
Yeah, so I don't know, I just bring to get a fish, adjust it to the water. Now I just. What happened?
Yeah, they do it at lunch, but not
I
as
said,
probably.
yeah, so, yeah.
Well, I think it was a light.
Yeah, well, let me know if I can like, oh, I got back before I.
Tell me why. Develop. I know a lot of different consumer songs and a lot of time. Take a lot that are going to be, those might be. They will get them and they might also maximize people on that lot. It might bring up different, but it might. But it's a lot higher. And the single families will look different as well. And that's the transition in neighborhoods. Right outside the yard, provides people trying to do. The downside of property owners potentially next door is that house does not like. That is like all over.
You got it.
Well,
Yeah,
I think that, but that is not how it usually works. And it
I'm
is.
gonna-
More expensive. I can tell you, if, you know, service piece, Portland, where I live, my little bungalow, if you put an asterisk next to it. I started with us. Now, I'm like, it's acted individually. A two-story, just looking down on my line, but I can guarantee you, I'm gonna sell that. But that is your transition, right? There are some,
I don't have the cardboard.
it's not.
No, I would still run that.
These are what they actually build out.
So these two are
Guys.
east of Elk Meadows.
Get my part of you come in. And so we do a program. I've done.
From that.
But that is chicken or egg to me, because there are so many employees in the school system and the forest service that don't need employees, they can't.
I know.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so we.
Yeah.
You know, you build a house, you build a house. It's like some are doing somebody else's house.
And then this over here is uptown weekend.
But as smart as you are, you know. Oh, really? Okay.
What I heard was
Principal and stuff,
Nick,
they all,
Many of them.
many of them.
was either is that my thought or why did you steal my thought?
Right now.
Yeah, that's kind of what.
So what's that so much about
Housing
the design and
Right now.
everything?
And, you know, we could.
And,
Some has to bar.
So my builder is the tar one.
I think they're scared of the price.
Yeah, I was saying.
Is it, this one is is actually designed for the accountant. So this one fits zoning. This is the commercial space. The rest of it's out right away. Yep, so this will be First Street. Here's the commercial space, and then everything else is. And this lot, I know you don't see it here, but I'm 90% sure that this lot is the grass field right over here. Yeah, yep, and then this is a park space. This was a lot of fun. I really, really had we're just seeing. You see here.
And so they got them all,
This is great.
that's the thing, and so, you know, we have 16 lots. They run it, and they go through the right path.
There is nobody but us on Zoom, so I'm gonna stop.
All you have to do is take it off. You'll build it.